Ishjay Fazan, and welcome to the next installment of the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators 2021 webinar series. Today's TAP webinar is on a very hot topic that we get lots of questions about: controlled burning and prescribed fire. It's a critically important part of landscape management and native plant restoration, but there aren't a lot of people that have expertise in the subject. We're very fortunate that Dr. Ray Moranz has generously agreed to share some of his vast knowledge about it with us today, including the role that fire plays in a healthy ecosystem, and just as importantly, how to use it safely. Dr. Moranz is the Grazing Lands Pollinator Ecologist for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. He also serves as a partner biologist for USDA and RCS and assists the Central National Technology Support Center with pollinator conservation work. He began studying the effects of fire and grazing on plant and butterfly communities in 2004 and earned his PhD in Natural Resource Ecology and Management from Oklahoma State University in 2010. Before we begin, I have a few quick announcements. We've set the dates for the TAP 2021 Fall Conference, and it will be a big multi-day event on September 21st through September 24th, 2021 at the Uchi Butterfly Farm just outside Bixby, Oklahoma. We have a lot of travel scholarship funding available, and we hope to get as many tribes from all over Oklahoma and all over the country as possible participating. Our new website, tribalallianceforpollinators.com, will have details about the conference posted soon. Today we'll take questions at the end of the webinar, but you can type them into the question box on the webinar dashboard at any point during the presentation. A recording of today's webinar will be posted to the TAP website after we're done. The website also has links to recordings of our past webinars. With that, I will turn it over to Ray.
Thank you very much, Jane. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to talking about one of my favorite topics, controlled burning and pollinators. Okay, I cannot adjust my slides. Did I need to hit change presenter, Jane?
Let's see, we should be.
I cannot advance.
Oh, you were. There you are. Yep.
No, I can advance. Good. Okay. Yes, I want to, for those of you who don't know about it, I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, a nonprofit organization that protects wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. And we got our name from the Xerces blue butterfly, a small butterfly that used to live out in California. And sadly, about 60 years ago, it went extinct. So people got together and formed this group to try to make sure that would never happen again. And I'm trying to again, and it's not working. It might have been you who advanced me last time, Jane. I apologize.
It's all right. I don't think, nope, I think you've got it. Okay. So it's your screen.
I'm hitting all the buttons I would normally hit to advance.
Okay. Technical difficulties. It's been happening at all the webinars and Zoom meetings lately. All right.
Are you able to advance for me?
I can't. I think that you have, I can make myself the presenter, then make you the presenter again.
Maybe we should try that. Maybe because yeah, I'm pressing all the buttons and I'm not able to advance. Okay, and now I hit show my screen, right?
A chance for a fresh start.
Yeah. Okay.
We've got the butterfly again. Yep.
And now I can advance. Okay. The Xerces Society, we have a whole bunch of different programs. The largest program is the one I'm a part of, the Pollinator program. But we also have programs on conservation biocontrol. That's working to maintain invertebrate populations that help protect our crops. For instance, ladybugs and spiders and praying mantises, things like that. Those are predators that help defend our crops from crop pests. We also have an endangered species program, numerous programs that you can see listed here. But again, I mentioned I'm with a pollinator program, and this map shows you the location of pollinator program staff with the star right there in Stillwater, Oklahoma for me. I also work for the USDA NRCS, specifically for their Central National Technology Support Center in Fort Worth, Texas. But again, I am based in Stillwater. And of course, the NRCS helps farmers and ranchers protect natural resources and feed the world. So, quick outline of this presentation. I'm going to talk about why people have applied fire to the land and why they should apply fire to the land now. I'm going to talk about fire effects on pollinators in general, but you'll see it's overwhelmingly on butterflies because that's been the focus of my research in the past. We'll talk about BMPs for habitat management, and finally I'll talk about some additional resources. So, we know that Native Americans burned the land, and they did so for thousands of years, and as some would put it, they did it since the dawn of time. And in numerous parts of the country, many tribes burned. And actually, if you look on a worldwide basis, there were peoples burning grasslands and savannas in Africa, in Australia, in Asia. So it's been a big part of human history. According to Professor John Weir at OSU, Native Americans had more than 70 reasons to burn the land. One of them was to drive bison towards hunting parties. Another was to send smoke into the faces of advancing armies. A third was to increase the abundance of certain edible plants. Maybe the most important reason of all was to improve the forage for game animals on the plains, namely the bison. As I think many of you know, as all of you do know, the bison herds used to be colossal, numbered in the tens of millions, and bison herds migrated in large part based on fire. Fire has the wonderful property of stimulating prairie grasses and flowers to resprout, and that fresh vegetation is much more nutritious than older grass and forbs, much more nutritious, we presume, much more delicious, and bison herds would follow the fires and go to the areas that had just been burned. And native peoples learned that thousands of years ago, we believe, and have been doing that ever since to help improve forage. So why should we burn today? Well, for many of the same reasons, but also some new ones. For instance, there are great benefits of controlled burning. Fire helps our grasslands stay grasslands by killing or top killing woody plants. And this is a very big deal throughout most of the Great Plains, especially Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. Not as much in North Dakota. They don't have as much of a woody plant encroachment problem, but it's a big problem down here. Fire also removes excess litter that can shade out young wildflowers. Fire increases blooming of multiple wildflower species, and it increases the bare ground for seed germination of our native plants. So a big emphasis of fire in Oklahoma is to kill cedars and other woody plants and restore grassland. And this happens to be some cedar on the land that my wife and I live on. And we are doing what we can to remove cedars, because look what used to be under those cedars. Nothing. Bare ground, very few plants, and shade, heavily shaded. Almost nothing else could grow underneath those cedars because of the competition for light and water. The cedars took it all. So my wife and I actually hired some folks to knock down hundreds and hundreds of cedars and grind them up. This is not our property. Our property doesn't look this good, but on another property where they eliminated cedars, amazing shows of wildflowers come up, and great habitat for monarchs and other pollinators as a result. Many reasons to burn, of course. Another one is burning to prepare your land for prairie restoration. So on the 10 acres that we live on, we're doing a fair amount of prairie restoration. And what you see on the right is a small ridge that used to have a lot of Bermuda grass. And we've been treating that Bermuda grass, trying to kill it. And now we need to prepare the seed bed. And one way of doing that is to burn it off. Well, there wasn't much fuel. There wasn't much vegetation there. So I use my propane torch to help speed up the process. Just a nice little trick. Perhaps the most important reason to burn today, or the second, along with cedar control, another huge reason to burn is to improve forage for cattle. Just like native peoples burned to help improve forage for bison, we today burn to improve forage for cattle. So, how does controlled burning impact pollinators? And I'll quickly introduce you to these major pollinator groups. We've got, of course, a butterfly in the upper left, something that looks like a bee here in the upper middle, but it's not a bee, it's a fly. We've got a moth in the upper right, a wasp in the lower left, beetles in the lower center, and finally a bee, namely a bumblebee in the lower right. All these groups of insects have lots of species of pollinators within them. So how does controlled burning impact them? Well, some studies have been done on the effects of controlled burning in bees. More elsewhere, not as much here in Oklahoma. Hopefully more of that will come. But a study by Kane and Neff in 2011, doing a lab study in Utah, showed that heat from fire killed ground nesting bees, primarily only the ground nesting bees that were close to the surface. But still, fire can kill pollinators in any life stage. Another issue with controlled burning in bees is that it can cause an immediate loss of pollen and nectar resources. And a study by Potts et al. Discovered this in Israeli shrublands in the Eastern Mediterranean, of course. Also, fire can eliminate stem nesting sites for multiple years. About 30% of our bee species nest in stems, like goldenrod stems or sunflower stems, sumac stems. And fires can burn up those stems and thereby kill the bees inside. Or if they don't do that, at least it'll eliminate the availability of those stems for future nesting. So, switching from bees quite dramatically to butterflies, the taxon I work with most. And what I'm showing you is one of Oklahoma's most beautiful butterflies and perhaps our rarest butterfly, the Regal Fritillary. This butterfly is a habitat specialist, meaning it only lives in certain habitats. What habitats does it like? Well, you're seeing it right there. It likes prairie, and it tends to like high quality native prairie that has violets down below, small little violet plants that are the host plants for the caterpillars, but also plenty of native flowers for the adults. So Regal Fritillaries, habitat specialists. This map shows you the historic and current range of Regal Fritillaries. The different colors represent different things. Regal Fritillaries used to occupy all of the areas, all of the states and Canadian provinces indicated by colors. However, the blue is a very bad color. The blue means Regal Fritillaries have gone extinct in that state, or people worried they might have gone extinct. Now this map's pretty old, and it shows Oklahoma as blue, and I don't think Regal Fritillaries are extinct because we saw a few of them in 2019. I work with OSU to do some surveys on them. Sadly, we did not find any last year, but I think we're going to find some this June up in Osage County, which is where they're strongest. This butterfly has suffered so much from development and changing practices that it is being considered being listed as a threatened species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In addition to the Regal Fritillary being a prairie specialist, we have numerous other prairie specialist butterflies, including the Arugo skipper on the left and the dotted skipper in the middle. So how does fire affect these prairie specialist butterflies? Research by Anne Swangel way back in the 90s is what got me inspired to look into this field. And Anne published a paper shown here, and the main focus of her paper, with most of the research done in Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, was that prairie specialist butterflies like Regal Fritillaries were less abundant in recently burned prairie. So she had data to suggest fire was bad for these prairie specialist butterflies. Seems a little strange because fire has been on the landscape for thousands of years. We know that. And these butterflies have been around for thousands of years, we presume. You think the butterflies would be able to handle fire. But Swangel did find lower numbers of butterflies in the burned areas, and she presumed that fire was incinerating the eggs, the larvae, and the pupae of the prairie specialist butterflies. Additional evidence of the mortality due to fire comes from various studies in various places. For instance, a study in Florida found that the Orogo skipper, shown on the left, was extirpated from Apalachicola National Forest due to a prescribed burn. This same butterfly has seemingly been extirpated from the entire state of Iowa, seemingly due to controlled burning, according to Anne Swangel. And then the Regal Fritillary, that large, colorful butterfly that is here in Oklahoma, it was extirpated from a prairie in Ohio, seemingly due to a single burn. So I got into this field because I love fire and I love butterflies, and I wanted to prove Anne Swangel wrong. I wanted to show that these butterflies can handle fire, that they have ways of coping with it. So here's one way that I'm going to talk about. Does fire always kill Regal Fritillary larvae and pupae? Well, the answer is no. And this is a prairie I worked on in southern Iowa, and shows some coworkers of mine, and they were looking for nesting birds back in June 2009. And how did they do that? They had a long rope, very long rope, and attached to the rope were beer cans, and then they dragged that through the prairie, and the rope and the noise of the cans is supposed to scare up the prairie birds. But they called me to say they weren't just finding prairie birds, they were finding Regal Fritillaries, and the fellow in the red shirt is holding Regal Fritillary, and that's in prairie that had just been burned 5 months earlier. So I had presumed, based on the work of Anne Swangel, that there would be no Regal Fritillaries there. They would have been killed by that fire. But no, they found numerous butterflies, and they were able to pick them up. Why were they able to pick them up? Because the butterflies had just come out of their chrysalids, which means they had spent the winter and spring in that very spot. So what that meant is those butterflies did not get burned up the fire. And I wasn't there in February for the fire, but they told me that this fire had been quite patchy. And so as you look at the picture and you see little patches of green, that's where tall fescue was. I'm not a fan of tall fescue, but the tall fescue in the prairie didn't burn well. And there happened to be some Regal Fritillary larvae hanging out in those spots, and they survived the fire. So a neat example of how patchy fires can actually be a good thing for our invertebrates. Here's another study by Kelsey McCullough and her colleagues up at Kansas State, looking at Regal Fritillary survival in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And what they found was plenty of Regal Fritillary larvae survived the fire. And part of the rationale for that, as you know, the Flint Hills are covered with flint, lots of rocks on the surface. So they suspect that some of the larvae were hiding under the rocks and thereby could survive the fire. Now I'll tell you about a research project I did in Missouri with Professor Sam Fuhlendorf and Dave Engel from Oklahoma State. We examined how Regal Fritillaries and their nectar sources were impacted by time since fire, grazing, and sampling period. And I'm not going to talk about sampling period anymore. Focus on the time since fire. We did the work at 4 sites in southwestern Missouri, shown here. And at each site, there were 2 pastures, One pasture, as shown on the left, had no cattle, but it was rotationally burned, meaning we would burn 1/3 of the pasture each year. And you can see each of these colors are representing different patches of the pasture. And you can see, obviously, the red indicates a patch that, the red indicated a patch that had recently burned, blue indicated something that had been burned a year before, and yellow indicated prairie that had been burned 2 years ago. And next to this pasture, we had another pasture with the same burning regime, but the addition of cattle. And I'm not going to talk about the grazing research much at all, but the key is when we looked at Regal Fritillary abundance, we found that Regal Fritillaries were most abundant in the areas that had just been burned, where the time since fire was 0. So why would that be? How could that be? If fire kills Regal Fritillaries, why would we have the most of them in recently burned prairie? I'm going to skip right to this. We think it's because of increased floral production. We know we had increased floral production. The fire stimulated pale purple coneflower, which is a wonderful nectar source for these butterflies. It stimulated that flower to bloom like crazy. Same thing with the tall blazing star on the right. It greatly increased the blooming of those plants. And we have the significant differences from our statistical tests to demonstrate that. So what we think was happening, and I will go backwards, is that in the areas where we burned, perhaps Regal Fritillary larvae got killed by the fire, but then in the spring and summer, the adults from the surrounding area and from the other patches flew into that recently burned area because it had the most flowers. So this brings up a very important principle, which is for fire to be beneficial for pollinators, you need to have some unburned areas nearby where the pollinators can survive. Because if fire is killing our pollinators, and sometimes it does, we need to have, the population of pollinators needs to have a refuge from that fire. So now I want to talk a bit about fire effects on monarchs. And these 3 studies listed here all talk about positive effects of fire. Swangel 1996 found that monarchs were most abundant in recently burned prairie. In a paper I did with Diane Dubinsky and others in Iowa, we found the same thing in Iowa and Missouri. In a recent paper by Leone et al. From Minnesota found that monarchs were more abundant in burned prairie than grazed prairie. So why would this be? Well, reason number 1, as just mentioned, fire stimulates the flowers to bloom more, and adult butterflies like to nectar on flowers. Why didn't the fires kill any monarchs? Maybe it did, but pretty likely not, because these studies all involved fires in the winter and early spring. Actually, that shows me, on the photo on the left shows me lighting a fire in Iowa, burning prairie, and that was in February. Where were the monarchs in February? As the picture on the right shows, the monarchs were in the forests of central Mexico, thousands of miles away from the fire, so they had nothing to worry about. So you can see the effects of fire are going to be greatly different based on what species of pollinator you're talking about. Another factor involved why monarchs can be benefited by fire is that fire can increase the abundance of some of our milkweed plants. And as many of you know, monarch caterpillars need to eat milkweeds. And so this is a paper, I should be working on this paper tonight. We haven't published it yet. We're still working on it, but the data look wonderful. I'm quite confident it'll be published, and that we'll be able to demonstrate that dormant season fire increases the abundance of this important milkweed for monarchs. This milkweed, green antelope horn, is the most important milkweed in Oklahoma. It's the most abundant, most widespread, and monarchs do quite well on it. And how is it impacted by fire? Well, it thrives in Oklahoma rangeland that is burned in winter and spring. This is a photo of some rangeland in Osage County that had been burned a few months before the photo was taken, and you can see the small plants with the yellow-green pom-poms are the milkweeds, and they're doing wonderfully. So this shows the results of a winter and spring fire. What happens if you burn in summer? If you burn in summer, for instance, in the study performed by Kristen Baum and her graduate student Wyatt Sharber, if you burn in July, that causes the Asclepias viridis, the green antelope horn milkweeds, to break dormancy, and they send up new shoots in August. Normally these plants go dormant in June and July, but fire stimulates them to come back up. And when the milkweeds came back up due to the fire, the monarchs came back. And so areas that were burned in Oklahoma in July had more monarchs than prairie that was not burned in July. Same thing happens if you mow or cut hay in July. But still, the important thing is the effect of the fire. And if you were interested in reading that study, you can see the references down below. Baum and Sharber, 2012, in the journal Biology Letters, Volume 8, 968 to 971. So now I want to talk about some BMPs for fire. Whether you're talking about butterflies, bees, beetles, we recommend that you burn no more than 1/3 of a prairie each year to try to minimize the direct mortality. Because again, it's fairly well established that fire hurts stem nesting bees, and it can hurt ground nesting bees that are near the surface. And there seems to be evidence that in some places fire will kill these rare butterflies. So we ask you to burn no more than 1/3 if possible, because pollinators need a refuge to recolonize from. However, if your neighbor has prairie and does not burn, that could be your refuge. So maybe that frees you up a little bit to perhaps burn a little bit more of your property, as long as you're confident your neighbor is not going to burn anytime soon. Back to the example I showed before from Iowa, where there's tall fescue plants, and that tall fescue diminished the spread of the fire. That can be a good thing. If small patches fail to burn, please don't go and try to burn them all up. Leave some of those small patches unburned. I know it's just natural to want to make things look perfect, make things look really clean, and to try to burn everything out. But those small unburned areas within your burn unit can be wonderful refugia for immobile insects like caterpillars, butterfly eggs, and bee pupae. Another BMP is to rotate the season of burn. Try not to burn at the same time every year, because you get different results. If you burn at the same time every year, you're going to favor some species over others. If you burn in the winter, you can kill native bees, but you won't hurt monarchs. If you burn in April or May, you might kill some monarch caterpillars, but it would probably be less harmful to the bees. If you burn in late June and early July, as I explained in the example a few minutes ago, you're going to stimulate green antelope horn milkweed to resprout, and you'll also increase blooming of some fall wildflowers. So even though I've just asked you to pay attention to the season of when you burn, and that is extremely important, we need to get more fire out on the land. It's extremely important, both to improve the forage for our livestock, to help our wildflowers, to help stop woody plant encroachment. So we need to be prepared to burn just about any month of the year. The reason why I have this photo, this is on our land, and it shows our chicken coop and our guinea hen coop. And, you know, there are lots of challenges to burning. You know, you can't always count on burning in the month you want to make it for perfect for pollinators, because maybe the wind won't be right. If we burn this on a day with north winds, that would have pushed all the smoke into our chicken coop. So So there are many considerations when you burn, not just what helps the pollinators. Another BMP is the beauty of integrating fire and grazing. And I mentioned this earlier, and the name for this is patch burn grazing. So if you have livestock, do know that if you burn a portion of your pasture, the area that you burn is going to have more fresher vegetation that's probably more nutritious and more delicious to your livestock. And by the way, patch burn grazing is really just copying what the Native Americans did for thousands of years. Because the Native Americans, by burning 10 acres, 100 acres, 1,000 acres, 10,000 acres, that was really just a patch of the Great Plains. And the bison and perhaps other animals would respond to that. And the bison would rotate around the Great Plains based on where the fires are. Well, that's what patch burn grazing is. It's really just mimicking the practices of the native peoples that were conducted for thousands of years. And I want to show a specific example. This is an example of some patch burn grazing in Iowa. And the patch of the pasture that you're seeing had just been burned a little bit before, and all of the cattle are huddled together, grazing down that piece of the pasture down to about 1 inch. So indeed, the number of butterflies and flowers in that patch were reduced. However, the flowers and butterflies in the other patches did fine. So that's one of the values of doing patch burn grazing. And livestock production is quite good on it. Another BMP has to do with fire return interval. If possible, try to keep your fire return interval of at least 3 years. And what we want to try to get people out of is the annual burning of vast areas, which happens in much of the Flint Hills. Dr. Shelley Wiggum of the Nature Conservancy in Kansas, formerly of Kansas State, has data showing that annual burning of the Flint Hills prairie lowers bee abundance and bee diversity compared to patch burn grazing. It also lowers butterfly abundance compared to patch burn grazing. So in some parts of Oklahoma, we think need more fire to help knock back the woody plants like cedars. But in the Flint Hills, which much of it is burned very, very frequently, we think the pollinators, we're confident that the pollinators would benefit from a little bit less fire. So where can you get more information? Colleagues and I developed this very brief guide for producers titled Rangeland Management and Pollinators. And this is available online. So simply search for Rangeland Management and Pollinators, or go to the website shown here, but obviously much easier for you to do the search, Rangeland Management and Pollinators, and this document will come up. And it talks about how to burn and how to graze with pollinators in mind. There's a wonderful book by a local expert. That expert is Professor John Weir from OSU. He has worked on over 1,000 prescribed burns. I had the great fortune of taking one of his classes in 2004 and helping him burn 10 times, and I learned so much from him. If you don't know how to burn, getting this book would be a good way to start. A little bit of a change of pace. If you want to learn more about plants for our monarchs or for our pollinators, the Xerces Society produces some really good plant lists. You can just search Xerces Society plant lists and eventually search for ones for the Great Plains and you'll find them. There's an excellent NRCS publication entitled Important Plants for the Monarchs, Southern Great Plains, and that provides the list of monarchs, list of native plants used by monarchs in Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. If you want to find that document, simply search for NRCS monarchs and go to the bottom of the page for the link to the free PDF. Okies for Monarchs is a nonprofit here in Oklahoma that cares about monarchs and pollinators, and they've got a great plant list. They have one for Eastern Oklahoma, one for Central, and one for Western. and it gives very detailed information about the monarch plants for Oklahoma. Well, who can help you? If you want to burn, but you're not sure how to start, who can help you? Bureau of Indian Affairs will work with tribes to burn tribal land. I have heard that they tend to have long waiting lists, so it can be hard to get BIA to get to burn your land because they're busy elsewhere. Something really neat that I found on their website is they have a pathways program. This is for high school students, college students, students at trade schools, to get you started in a great career, which is wildland firefighting. So please look into that. If you know of a young person who you think might be interested in that kind of work, I've done a bit of it myself, and it's exciting. It's great to be outside. It's obviously a little dangerous, but it's rewarding in many ways. Another organization that can help you burn your land is the NRCS. And NRCS can help provide technical assistance. They can also provide financial assistance to help you or your tribe burn land. So if you're a private landowner and you haven't gone to your local USDA office, but you're interested in getting assistance, right away, go to your USDA service center, look them up online, give them a call, ask where they are, go down there, fill out this document. You got to get registered. This is what I did. This is the document my wife and I filled out so that we could get technical and financial assistance from USDA. Took us 5 to 10 minutes. Another organization that helps is the Oklahoma Prescribed Burn Association. This Oklahoma Association is really made up of 22 different burn associations shown in the counties that are in black here on the map. So if you live in any one of those counties, you can contact a local prescribed burn association and get help burning your land. I think as part of the deal, you got to help them burn someone else's land, but something to look into. Then some other organizations, of course, your tribe. They already have an active burning program. I know I visited the Iowa tribe a few years ago, and they showed me their fire trucks and about the burns that they do. Quail Forever is involved in prescribed fire, the Nature Conservancy, and the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. Some other resources, the Xerces Society has a Facebook page, Twitter handle, Instagram, and a YouTube channel with lots of great videos on lots of great webinars that have been recorded with information on pollinator conservation. So this is getting very near the end, and I want to remind everybody to teach the next generation. And this is my daughter. She just turned 18, and I was so proud that she was out helping me burn part of our land a few weeks ago, and she really loved it. Teenagers tend to love this kind of thing. Of course, some of us older folks love it too. But we need to teach the next generation on how to do this, how to maintain the land. So I want to give thanks to my children for helping me burn. I want to thank for my wife for allowing us to burn on our land when we don't have to. We're doing it because it's the right thing. I want to thank Jane Breckenridge and Colin Spriggs of TAP for inviting me to give this presentation. I want to thank NRCS for their assistance with my work, and I want to thank the members of the Xerces Society. We're a nonprofit organization, and we've got to have members to keep us going. And finally, I want to thank the other supporters of the Xerces Society, a variety of corporations and trusts and governmental organizations. At this point, I will say thanks to all of you, and I'm looking forward to your questions in the next few minutes. But if you have any questions that you want to ask me at some other time, feel free to email me at ray.moranz@usda.gov. Once again, ray.moranz@usda.gov. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. That was an excellent presentation. That was really, really, really good. So I learned a lot, and there was a lot of issues that I had not heard other presenters on fire address. So thank you. We will take questions now. I'm not seeing any in the chat box yet, but we will give people a minute here. It should be on it's the part of the dashboard on your screen with your GoToWebinar information there. There's a place to type in questions. Let's see if we've...
Would you like me to hide my screen, or we're good?
No, we should be good. We should be good. Okay, so here are the questions now coming through. They weren't loading. Okay, so first question from Yvette Wiley: is there any adverse effect from or because of cattle grazing in the patch burned areas?
Yes. Yes. Depending on the stocking rate of cattle, yes, there can be an adverse effect of grazing. But it depends on the species you're looking at. It depends on where you are, and it very much depends on stocking rate. So the Regal Fritillary, that beautiful rare butterfly that I spent so much time talking about, its abundance was reduced in the patch burn grazing pastures compared to the pastures that had no cattle. However, there still were Regal Fritillaries in the grazed pastures. And, come on, let's get real. It's hard to make money just having prairie and burning it. You don't make a lot of money just by having, a rancher can't survive, obviously, by just burning his or her prairie. They've got to have some economic return. Livestock are a great way to get an economic return. And so, yes, heavily stocked cattle, even moderately stocked cattle, can have a negative effect on some pollinator species. On other pollinator species, it's possible that they'll have positive effects. But even when they have negative effects, they don't eliminate any of our native pollinators. Great question.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will burning an area negatively affect annual plant species since they may not be able to reseed?
That's a wonderful question. I should know the answer to that. I think the answer, I'm guessing, along with your guess, is that the answer is mainly yes, depending on the timing, of course. Now, if you burn in the winter, the annuals haven't come up, you're fine. But if you burn after they germinate, this should be an easy question for me. So if someone on the line is very confident with the answer, please let us all know. I'm strongly suspecting that if you burn an annual, like annual sunflower, if you burn it in midsummer, late summer, it's not coming back. But again, if you burn in the fall after it's already bloomed, not as much of an issue.
Okay, just to digress 1 minute. I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, this is when I used to live north, that certain species of pine actually needed fire in order for their cones to disperse seeds. I don't know if that's true or not, and it's not necessarily relevant to today's conversation, but it is just thinking about adaptation of species to fire.
That's many parts of the country with native pine. Of course, we don't have native pines, at least not where I live in Payne County, but I used to live in Florida, North Florida, and a number of the pine species there, but most famously longleaf pine. Longleaf pine had serotinous cones. Serotinous cones mean they release their seeds when they're heated up by fire. So fire is essential for proper seed production and seed release of longleaf pine, but also many of the pine species out west. Yep, wonderful point, Jane.
Okay, and our next question, this is actually from poor Colin. He lost his internet in the middle of this thing. But anyway, his question is, you may have covered this while my internet was out, but have you noticed any consistent negatives from burning, even using best practices?
Any consistent negatives from burning? No. I'm trying to think. No. If you're fire, I'm a huge fan, and my research has made me even more of a fan. And reading other people's research makes makes me more of a fan. The more I read about fire, the more I learn about it, the more positive, the more good things I learn about its positive effects. Especially when following the BMPs, especially that one about burning only a portion is exceptionally important when it comes to immobile things. Now, birds, adult birds can fly off, but of course, baby birds can get burned up. So if you happen to own, lucky enough to own 10,000 acres and you burn the whole thing in June, you're going to burn up some baby birds, and you're going to kill some butterflies and bees. And it might take years for them to come back, at least the butterflies and bees. It might take them a while to recolonize the burned area in the center of your 10,000 acres. But when you burn a portion of your land, that provides, you're guaranteeing that there's some refugia nearby for pollinators to live and to recolonize the area that has just been burned.
Okay, excellent question, excellent answer. Okay, next question. This is an important one. I think a lot of people will be interested in this one. Will my homeowner's insurance cover me if I burn?
I don't know. I don't know the answer for my house. And photos that I showed of our burns, there were a couple hundred feet from the house. Does anybody know?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that probably the official TAP position this is please call your insurance agent in your local fire department before you attempt a controlled burn. So
I have not called my insurance agent. I've not even thought of it. I do call the local fire department every time, and there's a simple reason, two simple reasons. A, I want them to know that I'm burning, so that if anything goes wrong, they can come help. They'll be primed to come help. But B, my neighbors might report me for having, they might say, hey, there's a fire, please go put it out. And I don't want the fire department to come and put out my fire and charge me $300 when I've got this nice little prescribed burn going on. The fires that we did near our house were exceptionally safe. We took a huge number of precautions to make them exceptionally safe. But I should learn about that. And Professor John Weir, who I mentioned earlier, he did teach us about the legal liability of doing a prescribed burn, but I have to confess, I have forgotten what he taught me way back in spring 2004. But it is an issue to consider. What is your legal liability? What if you burn somebody else's house? I think you're going to be liable for that. But if you follow certain proper practices, that may help to reduce your liability. I think that's the case.
Okay.
But I'm no lawyer.
Good answer. Okay. So ask and call your lawyer and your homeowner's insurance people. And anyway, there are a long list of people before you start getting out the fire. Okay. This is the next question from Marcy Hawkins, our colleague and friend. And this is an excellent question. If you implement burning in a field that has been overtaken by Bermuda and Johnson grass, is it possible that dormant native seeds would germinate and have a chance to reestablish?
I'm thinking, I'm not that optimistic.
Okay.
I think so. So our 10 acres that we are burning, we did have Bermuda grass and we did have Johnson grass, and I did not have faith in the power of fire to eliminate those. I may have been wrong, but I'm pretty darn sure that Bermuda can handle fire, and I bet Johnson can too. Johnson grass can too. So I chose to use, some people may hate me for this, but I chose to use chemical means for the Bermuda. And then the Johnson grass, I think the guineas actually, the guinea fowls actually ate it out of existence. But I don't think fire alone is enough to extirpate those species. And because I don't think it'll extirpate those species, the natives in the seed bank may germinate, but then I suspect they'll get swamped. Some of them might make it, but I think the majority of them would get swamped by the Johnson grass going crazy in midsummer.
Okay, so that kind of is a nice segue to our next question. Actually, it's from Colin, which is an excellent question here as well. I've read that Sericea lespedeza likes being burned and comes back with a vengeance. Do you know of any other problem species to identify before burning? And I've heard the same thing. I heard this from somebody who said when they were working at Iowa Nation that they said, don't burn Sericea lespedeza, you'll just make it mad. Actually, it was Philip Cravat who said that. But he heard that from, and he did it, he burned it anyway, and they were right. It did just make it mad, and it came back twice as thick. So I don't know. So what do you have? Do you have any recommendations on that?
I have the same experience with Sericea lespedeza. I've seen it, take over areas that were getting burned every few years. Down near Muskogee. So let me think. Well, Sam Fuhlendorf, again, professor at Oklahoma State, I mentioned him earlier because I was one of his pupils and did work with him. They showed that if you burn and then graze, that helps to reduce Sericea a little bit. Or the expansion of Sericea is not as much, because much of the time cattle are not big fans of Sericea lespedeza, of eating it.
Yeah.
But if you put the cattle on right after it's been burned, they're a lot more likely to eat those new shoots. As far as other plants like that, I have to confess, I do not, in my experience, fire knocked back tall fescue a little bit. It knocked back smooth brome. I know these are grasses more of the north or of northeastern Oklahoma. Old World blue stem, which to me is a problematic grass, that seems to handle fire pretty well, but I don't know that it explodes. So I still think the fire is still a positive, but you'll need other means to get rid of your Sericea lespedeza. And you'll probably need other means than just burning to get rid of, if you wanted to get rid of smooth brome or Old World blue stem. These questions are fantastic, by the way.
Okay, well, thank you. We're so happy to have the expert on the line here, so thank you, Ray. Okay, here's another question, and it's an interesting one. Our questioner writes, I noticed there are no Xerxes staff in the Deep South. Why? Is it because there's no prairie?
That's a wonderful question. Why are there no Xerces Society staff in the Deep South? I hope that changes, and I hope it changes soon. We started in the Northwest, and so and actually we were an extremely tiny organization only 20 years ago. 20 years ago we had a total of 3 staff, and now we have 55 or 60. So we're still not a huge organization, and we're slowly growing, and I very much hope we move to the Deep South. There's lots of pollinators in the Deep South, and we don't just work on prairie. We work in forests. We work in crop fields, in orchards. We work to conserve pollinators and other invertebrates in every ecosystem possible. So it's very much my hope that we have staff, that we're able to hire people in the Deep South. We had a staff member in North Carolina, and she just resigned to take an exciting new position overseas. But plenty of pollinators in the Deep South that would be great for us to work with.
Okay, well, I think that is all of our questions, and we're kind of running to the end of our hour. But thank you so much, Ray. This was really, really interesting, and for all of our attendees today, if you have additional questions, I think Ray would welcome them. We would certainly welcome if you have any other additional questions about invasive species control or whatever. If we don't know the answer, we'll try and get you the answer. and you can contact me, Jane at nativebutterflies.org, or if you go to our triballianceforpollinators.com website, there's all sorts of ways you can join TAP, access our resources. We have we have a lending library of equipment and supplies to help control your invasive species problems. So anyway, we're here to help you in any way that we can. So with that, we're going to sign off, but thank you so much for joining us today, and stay safe, stay well, and we will be hopefully announcing our next webinar soon, and please put our conference in September on your calendars, because we'd love to see you in person then, which I think things will be opening up, and we'd love to see you. So thank you very much, and have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much, Jane.